we're waiting for Mike to rejoin, I can give just a couple updates for folks who might have questions about East Park. And when the communications around East Park will really be starting in earnest. So we have a group that is working very diligently on trying to get all things East Park ready and sort of set up for us to start preparing for clinical research at the East Park facility, which will be over by the East Madison Hospital. We will be starting in earnest in January with regular updates about East Park, the plans, lab, transport, pharmacy research center, regulatory updates, our FWA, all of that will be coming up starting in January. But please know that behind the scenes, we're working with the IRB, we're getting our FWAs all squared away. We're doing the work that we need to do to be ready to start talking about operationalization of East Park. So don't think for a minute that we're not doing work on this. We just want to get our ducks in a row before we start communicating widely. Currently at this time, we anticipate that we will be open and enrolling some of our first research patients at East Park, which will be in the oncology area sometime in November of next year, so of 2024. So we do have a long lead-in period. The facility will open sometime mid to late summer of 2024. We'll be working on operationalization and getting clinical trials integrated into our workflows, but wanted to make sure, because we get a lot of requests from departments to talk about East Park, that we'll be communicating in earnest and regularly starting in January. So just a heads up on that. I don't know if Mike is back yet. Kevin, do you have a sense of that?
Maybe Betsy, I can give a little bit of an overview about the recruitment.
Okay.
And hopefully Mike will join by then. So ever since Betsy and I came into this institution, it was our collective dream to do something to improve the recruitment to clinical trials, not just to increase it from a research angle, but also to provide the opportunities to cutting edge trial opportunities to our patients. So we had been planning for quite some time, and the policy committee that Lynn and Betsy and I and others participate was very instrumental in coming up with the appropriate policies so that we can move forward with some of these activities. So we now have what we call as a recruitment core. So Mike Simonik leads it. He's an informatician in my group, and he is a pediatric nephrologist by training. And so being a clinician helps him to be very familiar with the clinical terms and being helpful in identifying the right candidate patient list, as well as working with the trial PIs or and enable some of the recruitment activities. So it's a very joint activity between the UW Health and Betsy's team, Chiro's IT team, as well as the SMPH informatics team. So we are very excited about it, except, I don't know if Mike is back now to do the presentation. If he is not, we'll present it next time. The planned activities.
I guess the other thing we could do while we're waiting is, Lynn, were there any updates that you had from the HRPP that you wanted to share with the group today? I wasn't sure if there was anything you wanted to update us on.
Yeah, there aren't major updates. We just sent a newsletter recently to everyone. I will put in the chat, we are trying to gather feedback about our IRB efficiency project, which many of you know was a huge effort from our side over, between say March of 2020 until we launched some of the new tools in 2021, and we've been fine-tuning them since then. I know one of the concerns that many study teams provided to us after the launch of especially the website was that our searchability was not optimal. And we recognized that that was true. We had to work within the sort of platform that the website is on, but we have now just recently in August reformatted the especially the manuals and other aspects of the website to allow for much more streamlined searchability of the website. So please check that out. And we hope that that will continue to work. We are going to be, after we close the survey, which will be probably the first week of October, taking that feedback, really distilling it with our education teams, with our website team, in case there are things that we can continue to improve upon, because the goal here is to be able to facilitate the work that we all need to do, the research, the clinical trials and human subjects research that we need to do. So we take your feedback very seriously and really appreciate the effort to provide us with that feedback. We'll be presenting, we have had, I think I had presented a while back when we were doing some presentations, our turnaround times have improved, especially for full board studies, from around 75 to 80 days median turnaround time to about 45 days turnaround time. And our expedited and exempt turnaround times are also down. We're presenting that more broadly across campus, and we have a poster for the upcoming primer meeting in December. So that's why I want the survey data, because I want to include that in the poster as well, because I think that, one of the reasons we did this was to provide, to respond to some concerns from the research community.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynn, for that update. It sounds like a lot of great information, and Lynn's group is putting together this poster. So if you can look at the link that she put in the chat and help them out, I think she would greatly appreciate that. We'll would appreciate you providing any feedback to them. So thank you.
You know what, Betsy, in response to what you were talking about the East Park Clinic, I know we've recently received a question about, where will East Park fit in sort of the grand scheme of, is it in or out of the different systems? And so we're making the assumption you all, the UW Health, will add it to your federal-wide assurance, and therefore our master agreement between the IRB and the UW Health, UWHCA will include that. So that will be an in location, not an location that we have to have other agreements to conduct.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We were hoping you would say that. We saw something in there that said UW Health Authority, hospitals and clinics. So we figured it would fit in there, but we wanted to make sure. So we will definitely get that ready to go.
Yep.
Great. So it looks like Mike is back on his phone. So Mike, can you hear us?
I can hear you all. Is my audio working better now?
Your audio is much better. Yes. So did you want to share slides, or do you want to just talk us through it?
I'll have to do some talking, unfortunately, because the slides are on my computer and I shut it down and it doesn't feel like restarting at the moment, apparently. So I apologize for that. Again, thank you everyone for coming. So the recruitment team is designed to help recruitment in clinical trials, and our mission is to use all of the informatics tools that we have available in order to do that. Ultimate goal is to make clinical trial recruitment faster and easier for everybody involved. The major tools at our disposal there's sort of divided into two camps. The first camp is using data from the electronic health record to identify potential participants and then sending information about those participants to the study team. So an example of that would be patients who have diabetic peripheral neuropathy who you're looking for your study. We can identify those patients in the system and then send you information about them, such as phone numbers or addresses or upcoming clinic appointments with specific doctors, so that they can be approached either by phone or by mail or in person, if that is what makes sense for your study team. So that's sort of one camp. And then the second camp of tools we have are tools within HealthLink itself. So these can include things like reporting workbench reports that show upcoming OR cases for surgical studies that are recruiting for specific surgery types. It can include things like best practice alerts, where an alert will go off when a specific type of patient is admitted to the hospital. Because, for instance, there was one study that was looking for newly diagnosed atrial fibrillation, but they had to be enrolled within 24 hours of being in the hospital. So we used the best practice alert for that. When a patient with possible AFib showed up in the ED, that best practice alert would go off for the study team, so they'd be notified, hey, there's a potential patient that showed up. Make sure you follow along and see if they'd be a good recruit, and if so, you can go recruit them within that really narrow time window. So that is the second sort of big camp of tools that we provide. I'll stop there, I guess, and see if there are any questions.
There are a couple questions that have come in prior to the session that I think you might be able to answer. So one is, can you share more about the types of studies that you have either seen or you believe would benefit the most from MyChart recruitment?
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent segue, because I didn't even really mention MyChart recruitment in my big spiel, because it sort of takes data from both camps, in that we identify the patients using data from the electronic health record, but then rather than sending you information like phone numbers, we actually send you a list of patients so that MyChart messages can be sent out. So that is a big new thing that we are piloting, and it's definitely happy to work with your study team on that. In terms of the question of what would be the best study types for MyChart, I don't know that we've really identified a specific best study type. The ones that we've piloted with it so far were pretty varied in scope and size. So we used it for smaller studies. We used it for studies with rare conditions, but we've also used it for studies with really common conditions. So I would say that if you are thinking about using MyChart for your study, definitely talk with me, because I think it could be a really good modality for a lot of different studies.
Great, thank you, Mike. Another question is about what sort of lead time should we expect for services, for your services? For example, the data pulls with phone numbers or addresses, more complex data pulls that include patient lists or eligibility, like the best practice alerts, and or MyChart recruiting assistance.
Yeah. So it depends a little bit on the complexity, but in general, our goal is to have the more simple, straightforward phone numbers, upcoming clinic appointment addresses. We like to have those requests turn around within 3 weeks. And I think we've been pretty successful with that so far. Our average turnaround time is actually about 2.5 weeks right now for those. For the stuff that gets built in HealthLink, that takes some more resources and a lot more back and forth between the study team. There's a lot of testing that goes into that. So that's more of like a 2 to 3 month window for anything that's bigger but built in HealthLink. But for the bread and butter, we need to know which patients are showing up in clinic in the next week so we can approach them for our research study. That should be turned around in about 3 weeks.
Okay, great. let's see. I'm really excited about this new development. What are the plans for this group to continuously develop, embrace new uses of our technology and data to assist us in clinical trials, recruitment, and enrollment where it's appropriate?
Great question. I think one of the things we're focused on right now is something called HL7, which for those who don't know is the way for different clinical information systems to communicate with each other. So for instance, all of the vital sign machines that are sending vitals over to HealthLink are communicating via HL7. HL7 is great because it allows for real-time data. So the downside to our data pools is that they're always at least 24 hours behind, because if something happens today, it won't make it into our storage system until tomorrow. So for the real-time things, that's why we turn to things like BPAs, where it happens in HealthLink and can act on real-time data. But we're working on connecting more of our systems by HL7, which will allow us to do more kinds of data pools with real-time data. So we won't necessarily be limited to HealthLink's tools. We can start to use other tools outside of HealthLink and try and capture patients more in the moment than we're doing right now.
Great. I see in the chat that there were some questions about MyChart recruitment being whether or not MyChart recruitment is restricted to only registries or non-interventional studies. And I think we're happy to share that recently the bioinformatics, or the Clinical Research Policy Committee has updated their recommendations to include interventional studies where appropriate. Obviously, it's not appropriate for all interventional studies, but there are some where it's very appropriate, and we're happy to support those studies as well. One other thing that we would want you all to know is that in the past we were supporting only new studies with new recruitment plans. We can support existing studies that need to use MyChart recruitment. However, you will need to work with the IRB to modify your application to include MyChart recruitment and get that approved by the IRB before we can help you with that. Okay, Mike, I think there is one more question for you here. As you think about this team, what do you feel like the next areas of development might be to help us do better in reaching patients who may be eligible for clinical trials?
I think MyChart is definitely the first step in that direction, because we haven't really had a good way to electronically reach patients about these things. You know, we've had the phone calls, but I'm 40 years old and I don't really answer my phone if I don't know who's calling. So I imagine there's a lot of people that feel like me. We have flyers, which, you know, and I'm not trying to downplay all of these things. They'll continue to be an important part of recruitment, but we really haven't had that way of electronically reaching patients before. And I think MyChart is going to be that. I'm really excited for where we can take it in the next year. We've only been able to use it a handful of times so far, but as Betsy mentioned, we've recently opened it up to a whole wide variety of studies and would love to use it more. So I think that's going to be a big step in the next direction. And then as I was mentioning about the real-time identification, I think that's going to really come in handy for things like cancer studies, where there's really specific criteria and there's also really specific windows. Like you have to catch the cancer patient before they've started treatment or as they're transitioning away from one treatment to another treatment. And I am hopeful that the more real-time data will allow us to capture those patients and send up flags so that they can be approached during the narrow window where they'd be eligible.
Great, thank you. It looks like, oh, go ahead.
You know, one more thing that in terms of technology that would eventually help us is right now when we do a lot of data polls to look at candidate patients, we are looking at codified data. And many of you know that one of the curses with the HRs is that a lot of the data is not codified and it's in notes. So what we are working on is to see if we can use natural language processing, and down the road, some of these newer AI models to parse the data, the text data, and make them into what we call as concept identifiers. So, that will help to augment the codified data. And we purchased one tool and we piloted it for cancer studies, and we are going to leverage that and see if that improves candidate patient identification. So that will be coming, and the team will be using that to identify the correct list of patients.
Great, thank you. This could be either from Mike or Jamal, and I'm not familiar with this term, so I hope you guys are. And Kelly Miller is asking, how is this initiative connected to I2B2, or maybe it's replacing that?
Yeah, so I2B2 and Trinetics are two self-navigation tools, kind of like Slicer Dicer, except that it's not sitting inside the EHR. So you can continue to use it. There is nothing against it. So you should more and more use it so that what kind of patients exist when you're preparing for a grant, etc. When it comes to really identifying candidate patients, because these tools map data to underlying, standards, sometimes the details about the data is lost. And for example, a few ICD codes may be clubbed together. And so if you're looking for a rare disease, they may not give you the exact count. So I would use them as a first step, before you approach the recruitment group or before you even write the trial, to make sure that there is enough number of potential candidate patients. And then when it comes to real recruitment, I would say leverage the team, because that will give you more accurate results.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. There's another question here. It says, sometimes there is confusion if we can contact patients via email or not. Can you add any clarity from a recruitment perspective?
So I'll share my understanding. If there's anyone else on the call that disagrees, please feel free to chime in and we can have a really vigorous Q&A about it. My understanding is that email cannot be the first point of contact between UW Health and the patient. So it can't be the cold call, hey, we're looking to recruit you for this study. But once you've contacted the patient and they give you permission to use the email, then you can do some email communication back and forth. And then the rules that apply there are, you shouldn't necessarily be doing a lot of PHI back and forth via email because it's not secure from a PHI standpoint. But you can reach out to the patient and potentially answer simple questions and things via email if that would be.
And I just want to add to that, email is an appropriate recruitment methodology if approved by the IRB. For example, DoIT can help create mass emails, and we get these all the time. We all get these about studies on campus. But that's it's more a matter of where you are getting the email list from. So as a university employee, you can utilize the DoIT services to get a broad email list. But I believe, and this is not a UW Madison IRB thing, but a hospital process that they will not release the patient emails for recruitment. So that's more of a UWHC constraint than an IRB constraint.
That's correct, Lynn. So you spelled it out exactly. So UW Health does not want us using emails from the HealthLink system or otherwise as our first interaction with patients. So we are not to use those email lists for primary recruitment. Once, as Mike said, once you have been in contact with the patient, if you want to send them, for example, sometimes they request an informed consent that they could look over before they come in or something like that, or some more information. Once that initial contact's been made and they give you permission to use their email, then it's fine. But that initial contact through the email that we have in HealthLink is the one that we are not allowed to use. I will also throw out there that at this point in time, UW Health also does not allow the use of text messaging. Text messaging is not secure. And so that is not a point of contact, particularly for initial contact, that we would like. And the use of MyChart, we hope in many cases may be, excuse me, a substitute for both email and text messaging. And the IRB also can work with teams on looking at how, or MyChart as a way to recruit patients within the hospital system.
Yeah, and I think, again, Mike touched on it, but email is not a secure platform for exchanging PHI. And I believe on the IRB website, we do have some language that you should include in an email if you're going to communicate, because often, the individual you're communicating with doesn't understand the sensitivity of some of the information as well as you might, and inadvertently sends you a bunch of information that shouldn't be in an email. And also, of course, the title, the subject line is really important. Not to divulge too much about what the study actually is.
Thanks, Lynn. Let me see if there's any other questions that we have here. This one is actually for Jamal. If you were to set a long-term vision for what recruitment in our system looks like in the future, what would you like to see?
So that's a great question. At some point, I would love to say, like, can you please identify patients who meet such and such criteria verbally and get answers to it. So that's obviously far ways. The problem, I think the steps that we are taking are deliberate steps towards accomplishing that mission. So we want to improve the real-time capabilities. So we want to bring in data real time and see if we can identify the patients. Where it would be helpful is, like, let's say you want to identify a set of patients while they are in the ED, when they have an increased lipase level, that has to be done quickly. And so that's where the real time will help. In addition, the addition of NLP or natural language processing will help in increasing the identification of potentially eligible participants. And then what we want to focus on is how do we really reach out to the patients, right? So MyChart is a means. We want to also think about, are there other opportunities? Can we develop tools that would give them the information? Language is a barrier. Culture-aware messaging is another. So we will be like taking one by one baby steps, but we know that we have a long road and some deliberate activities to do. I would love to actually increase the language capabilities so that we can reach out to patients, with various, not all of them speak English. And obviously when we are leveraging MyChart with English only, it's limiting. So we want to increase the diversity in the participant pool. And my dream at some level, and we'll be trying this too eventually, using the show or survey of the health of Wisconsin population, we would try to see if we can reach out to people who are not, currently our patients and get into the communities. So that is a little bit far-fetched, but we'll be looking into that as an option also.
Great, thank you. Lynn, it looks like a question for you. It says, oops, I just lost it. Somebody else put a question in. Okay. For seated studies, is there a policy or requirement that speaks to the use of email language provided by UW IRB guidance, or is it up to the study team?
That's a good question. And I know that this often comes up when we're talking about the difference between, say, the IRB consent template and our 502C consent template language for when we're seating, which only includes language that's required by state laws, and that is absolutely the things that we have to have in there. I think, again, mostly the email guidance is more dictated by where you're getting the email information from, or, you know, where you're getting that list from. So not using the emails that are in HealthLink, I guess. So is the question, you know, what is the question? I think the guidance that we have would be guidance that you would use, the guidance that we have on the IRB page, but it depends, you know, the other, we're not the IRB of record, obviously, when we're seating. So if that IRB has a suggested change, you know, they're the IRB who's reviewing it. It would have to just align with our current, you know, UW Health policies if it's coming from UW Health. I guess I don't know that we have specific guidance for seed email guidance. I guess, sorry, that was a long and convoluted response to that, but I don't know that we have specific guidance for email recruitment when we're seeding, other than what's in our consent template required languages already.
Great, thank you. So we have another question here. It says, all of today's discussion has revolved around recruitment at UW Health. Given the joint operating agreement and the amount of work many of us work and do in research at Meritor, are there any updates on recruitment via technology or non-technologic resources there?
So one of the things I can talk about, we have been trying to establish, so we have established data sharing agreements now with ACHC, as well as, you know, Swedish American obviously now is a component of UW Health. But we did establish one with Swedish American too. So we could recruit patients if we needed from these places, you know, but we need to inform them upfront and do the necessary steps. But that's possible now. We are trying to work out an agreement, a similar agreement with Meritor. But the challenge there is because we are two different covered entities, that agreement is taking a lot longer. I'm hopeful that it can materialize over the next year. And once that happens, we'll probably do the same thing. I mean, we have to inform Meritor leadership about the trials, but then we'll be able to recruit using our methods. So we're working towards that, and and Meritor itself has to take it to their whatever the I'm forgetting the name of the
Unity Point.
Yeah, Unity Point is now controlled by something else too, I think. So they have to take it through their channels. So that's why it's taking more time. But hopefully in another year, we will get there.
Great, thank you, Jamal.
Yeah, not to splash cold water on that, but I think even with that agreement will go a long way towards us being able to recruit there. But until Meritor and UW Health are on the same instance of Epic, we won't be able to use any of our technologic tricks over there. And I don't think that is going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah, the thought was, Mike, to embed some of our staff there so that they can do the polls, but you know, it won't be technologically savvy, technologically advanced as we would want in the early stages.
Great, thank you. Another question, this is a great question. Actually, there's a couple that are sort of related. And one is, as an institution, are we using Epic's life sciences program platform as for clinical trials, and any updates on Epic Cosmos? So those two are sort of in the same bucket. I don't know, Jamal, if you want to talk a little bit about where we are.
Yeah, the life sciences platform, no, we haven't. But the Cosmos, yes, we have signed the Cosmos agreement. But Cosmos is with limited data. So it's not, and when you get the data, it's de-identified data. So it's not a recruitment tool at the moment. It can probably tell you, maybe I'd help identify sites or something like that down the road. But just to let you know that we have signed the agreement and we'll be able to leverage Cosmos. We are doing one pilot trial through an ophthalmology study. So we are just waiting for the IRB to be complete so that we can understand what are the constraints with data. And I've worked in the data area for years now, that when you try to integrate data from multiple places, you encounter a lot of issues. So this is for us to learn what are the constraints and identify solutions before we expose it to everyone. But the agreement is already there.
Yeah. I think too, to talk about the life sciences program a little bit. So both Jamal and I, as well as Mike and others, including our HealthLink team, have regular meetings with Epic at this point and are discussing some of the programs that they are bringing up. The life sciences program, I will tell you, is quite in its infancy. It's an exciting idea, and I think there's some work that needs to happen there. And we have been talking with not only our life sciences partners, like folks like Novartis and Merck and others that may potentially use the program, but also talking to Epic about how and when it might be appropriate for us to use a program like that. So I think it's not, we're in constant talks with them, and as things evolve, so are we trying to. These are great, all great ideas, and we love great ideas, but actually implementing them in a system is a little bit different. So we're working through some of those pieces, and Cosmos, I think it took us a year and a half, a little more than a year, to get that up and running. So we definitely are moving on these things and having the conversations. I just think sometimes the pipeline is pretty quick and full of ideas, and we're not always in a position to sort of be the first user of those, or they may not be ready for prime time. So oftentimes you hear about them before they're ready for prime time, but please know that we're consistently once a quarter or every few months having conversations with Epic about what they have in their pipeline and what would be appropriate for UW. So we hope that some of those really neat ideas that they have will develop into something that will actually be usable. I think one other question, this is a great question. Jamal, you talked about natural language processing. Could you give an example of when natural language processing might need to be used in recruitment?
Yeah, so I think cancer is a very good example. So, for example, something as simple as stage sometimes gets embedded in a note. It could be in a pathology report. It could be in a radiology report, or if you need to look at clinical staging, that could be then something that the physician then created based on the radiology report, the pathology report, the clinical conditions, etc. So it gets buried in the notes. So if you have a study which is looking at a drug, and it's stage 1. It's a much simpler thing, and we are working towards actually codifying that and having a process to actually have it codified all the time. But that's the simplest example where if we can just extract the information, that would be much easier. The other example is a lot of times you do genomic test send outs, and the results come back and in notes, in some form of a PDF, and you may be looking for people with a particular mutation. So and that's definitely buried somewhere, and you need to pull that information. So those are some very simple things that ideally should be codified, which is not, which we could leverage.
Great, thank you, Jamal. Let me see. Are there any other questions that anyone has for Jamal, Lynn, Mike, or myself that we can answer for you at this time? Great. Seeing no more questions, I want to thank. Oh, go ahead, Lynn.
No, I was just going to, and this is probably, well, maybe a little premature, but no, I know. So Jamal, you talked about the trying to establish an agreement, a formal agreement with Meritor. I do know that we have been working through, and I don't think it's finalized yet because I don't think the policy is finalized, but there are joint ventures between the UW Health and Meritor. For example, the Madison Surgery Center, Generations, Transformation, the Wisconsin Sleep Center, where it was very confusing for a while that, whether you needed approval at both places. I believe that Lisa Wilson, our IRB director, has been working with Meritor, and there is an agreement that since the individuals who work at those joint ventures are UW associated and all the data is ours, that there's an agreement to pull those into our ACE. I don't think that's finalized yet, but when that is finalized, that will at least eliminate the barrier of having to have other agreements when you're trying to recruit patients from those joint venture areas. So.
Well, there is a question related to that.
Oh.
Our ACE is very confusing. Is there somewhere we can go to find simplified information on what is included and what is not?
Other than in the policy, that's a really good question because I don't have a simple place for that. I'm trying to remember if we have something on our website. I don't know if Monica's on.
I'm on, Lynn.
Lisa, there you go. Sorry, Lisa, I jumped on your fire.
No, that's okay. I do think the policy is the best place to see exactly what's in the ACE because it's those are updated as needed. So I'm just looking for the numbers here so people can easily find them. So if you look at UW-101, that'll break out all of the healthcare component, and then the UW, it should be, well, they both say 101. Wait, sorry, UW 100 and UW 101. Yeah, so that'll break both of those out, the HCC and the ACE.
Great, thank you, Lisa.
If you have questions about that, the Kurt's team and the recruitment team and the research team pretty painstakingly keeps track of what's in the ACE and what's not. So even down to a departmental level. So if there are specific questions, we can help answer those too.
Great, thank you, Mike. Sort of another comment, not a question. Somebody said this was a great topic of a lot of interest. Would it be possible to have another research forum on this topic sometime next year? And I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. I think this is a topic that probably touches every study team in one way or another. And certainly as Mike and Jamal and the Clinical Trials Institute work together to develop more services and work with Epic, I think it would be a perfect topic to have more presentations and discussions on. So thank you for the suggestion, and we will definitely do that.